But many of those women are returning to prison. They plan to commit a crime on a Friday when they're released so that they can come back on a Monday because there is no other safe place for them to go.
In a tense session inside the London Assembly at the UK Parliament, Sam Moema goes head-to-head with Mayor Sadiq Khan in a debate that quickly turns into a political showdown over domestic abuse, housing shortages, women leaving prison, and public safety across London. Billions in public funding, a £54 million emergency accommodation commitment, partnerships with Airbnb, policing powers, MOPAC accountability, the Ministry of Justice, recidivism rates, and what critics call a postcode lottery in housing support. It's all laid out in this explosive exchange. But beneath the policy language, there's a deeper confrontation about leadership, responsibility, and whether City Hall is truly protecting vulnerable women and children. Why are women reportedly planning to re-offend just to return to prison? Why is long-term accommodation still falling short? And is London's system broken at its core? Watch until the end to understand the full implications of what was said and what wasn't. If you believe in open debate and accountability, share this video, like and subscribe. Many argue Labour voices are increasingly shaping the narrative around information, so independent platforms matter more than ever.
And the government to go after the perpetrators of these heinous crimes.
Thank you, Mayor Khan. Thank you for that answer. So this is something which has been really close, a particular issue that's been very close to my heart before I joined the Assembly, and I was really proud previously to work with the trade union around amendments for survivors of domestic abuse in their workplaces. So I think it's obviously a welcome step that the £54 million that has been committed is there and it's in place. And, I commend, I don't normally, but I commend Airbnb on this occasion for that support that they're providing in this really difficult period to provide that temporary accommodation and that emergency accommodation, rather. We obviously know that one of the issues is the chronic shortage of refuge space for those that are fleeing abuse. So in terms of longer term accommodation, what is being provided? Because I think one of the particular issues is, obviously this issue sits across many areas. It's a housing issue, but it's also a policing issue and falls under the remit of MOPAC. It is the Commissioner of the Accommodation. But women who are primarily the victims of domestic abuse, they need to be flagged as having been a victim of domestic abuse. How are we making sure that actually it's standalone accommodation without having to re-victimise those survivors of domestic abuse?
Yeah, can I just thank the member for a question? Like I said, this time of year particularly important. So the good news is the point she was concerned about, which is, one department, it'd been more than one department issue. I think it's been addressed this week by the government's Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. I was with the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, but also the Home Office Minister, Jess Phillips, this week. And one of the great pieces of announcements they made this week is in every GP practice, and she will know from a previous life, often a victim or survivor goes to the police after dozens of incidents where they've been the victim of abuse. Often they go to health practitioner much, much sooner. So a GP will now have somebody they can call upon to provide the support, which is so important in terms of help that victims and survivors need. One of them is accommodation, which is incredibly important. So the bad news is, at the moment, the provision of accommodation does not meet the demand. What we're doing from City Hall with our limited funds is not, in addition to the DASA stuff, we are funding, led by and for organisations, sums of money per year for the next few years for them to make sure they can help this underserved community with the right accommodation. And she will know as well, led by and for services tend to be better used by the vulnerable individuals we're talking about, women we are talking about as well. We're separately considering what further commission options we can have working with the government because they've got the funding. But also, I do commend Airbnb because we've got to think about innovative ways to find the accommodation, and she will know from her experience it's those first few days and first few weeks that are so crucial. The other point to make finally is we've got to make sure the police go after the bad guys. So why do they keep the home and the woman and kids move away? And so using more injunctive powers, more police powers to make sure the perpetrator, prosecutions are brought, and they're taking out the accommodation, so the woman and the child can stay in the home if it's possible and if it's safe.
Thank you for that. I also wanted to follow up on the report that the Housing Committee has published around housing for women leaving prison. And I think you have responded to that. I was not able to attend Housing Committee yesterday, but my colleague, Assembly Member Boff, asked the Deputy Mayor about this particular topic. So one of the things that, I suppose it's as well understood, but one of the things that we learned and had reaffirmed on our visit to Bronzefield Prison, where the majority of women leaving prison, the majority of women who were incarcerated from London, the majority of them are at Bronzefield Prison, when they, who were overwhelmingly survivors of domestic abuse, it was just kind of through the whole system. There were comments from members of staff who were very, very confused about why some of those women were in the prison system rather than receiving support in a more social setting and been supported in the community. But many of those women are returning to prison. They plan to commit a crime on a Friday when they're released so that they can come back on a Monday because there is no other safe place for them to go. So I just wanted to ask you, perhaps in conversation with the Deputy Mayor at a future date, just kind of what steps are being taken to address the gap, to fill the secure accommodation gap, specifically for women leaving prison, because I know we've had lots of conversation at Housing Committee about the broader, really welcome initiatives that are being taken. But in terms of on a borough-by-borough basis or across London, a relatively small cohort of women leaving prison would be an absolute game changer. And those conversations with MOJ, I think that's missing from the conversation.
Yeah, can I say to the member, I mean, this is a really good example of where the work of the Assembly and the committee has moved mayoral policy. I remember it was about a year or 2 years ago when I think members of the Assembly were telling their stories about, I think the Deputy Mayor was on one of the visits where you had women prisoners saying that actually when they leave prison they may recommit an offence because they've got decent accommodation in Bronzefield. That we really started looking at this, even though it wasn't our statutory responsibility, but it's affecting Londoners. And that's why I was so pleased when Lord Timpson agreed to join the House of Lords and bearing in mind his expertise in penal reform. And that family's wonderful in terms of what Timpson do in terms of employing people with a conviction. And you sort of had confidence that because of Lord Timpson's values, there'd be a decent review. And the work that they've done in this area is already making a difference. I think, many women who are in prison really shouldn't be in prison. Often they're acquisitive crime to support kids. Often they're fleeing domestic abuse, domestic violence. And so that's a really important part of the work we're involved in now, talking to the MOJ. The other thing we can add value on is something she referred to, which is the sort of postcode lottery if you go to Council A versus Council B or Council C. Could be because Council A has more accommodation than Council C, but often it's poor quality officer advice, poor quality officer information. So one of the things we can do, and we are doing with a small sum of money in the grand scheme of things, is accreditation to train up officers to understand the support that is available and how they can help these vulnerable women, often with children and so forth. And the final point I'm making, and please don't think this is patronising, often it's intergenerational. So a woman who's in prison, often her mum was in prison. If we can break that cycle by investing, it's not just great for that family's lack of misery, lack of the next generation's misery, it saves the taxpayer money as well. In terms of the average cost of keeping somebody in prison is, I think, $44,000 a year from memory. Think about how we could use that money sensibly outside of prison and make that individual, somebody who contributes to society, rather than being, this inverted commas burden.
Okay, thank you. I don't take that to be patronising at all. Obviously, it is an intergenerational issue, but one of the things that we again had reaffirmed by staff and volunteers at the prison from top to bottom was the fact that actually of those women that were in prison, the majority were there on remand and they lost their families, their children were taken into care because they were away for 3 months or more, they lost their social tenancies, they lost their jobs, and it began a cycle. And so I really do think that a specific intervention, perhaps partnership with housing associations, would be really welcome. Lambeth are doing that really well. They are really aware and putting in place the Homelessness Reduction Act for these women, and they have they have significantly reduced recidivism, which is different compared to men who are leaving prison, and that's also a really welcome piece of work. But my final question, I do apologise to my Chief Whip. I wanted to just really pick up on some work that we had done previously when I was chairing the Housing Committee a couple of years ago around working with local authorities to develop standards. So you have touched on that and about breaking that intergenerational cycle. That's the consistency of service provision across London and making sure that housing officers across the capital's 32 boroughs really understand legal entitlements to housing and in particular in relation to domestic abuse. And just wondering if it's not possible at this meeting to just come back to me and those who are interested on how that's going to be done in conjunction with this domestic abuse project that's being funded.
No, again, another important question. So firstly, can I also commend Lambeth Council with that multi-agency approach, which is, I'm worried about Chief Whip might tell me off, so I'm looking at the member rather than the Chief Whip. The multi-agency approach in relation to helping women and survivors. Just to reassure her, the pilot we're doing with Airbnb and Women's Aid does include providing advice on housing and securing longer-term accommodation. The sort of jargon is wraparound care, but we've made sure there's wraparound care as well because it's really important.
If you believe this conversation must not be silenced, make sure you like this video, share it everywhere, and subscribe.